Lesser black-backed gulls, commonly known as seagulls, are well known for their mischievous thieving behavior and raucous noise. Seagulls, synonymous with scavenging, have long been relying on humans for their food resources. Down the Warden Sea, for instance, these lesser black-backed gulls can be seen, rallying around fishing boats for fish discards. However, new European laws have advocated for a ban on these discards. What this entails for the population of lesser black-backed gulls is yet unknown. We are going to speak to a local fisherman about the gulls' foraging behaviors.
Is it common to see gulls around fishing boat while trawling?
Yes, it's common to see gulls around boats when trawling, but only when hauling and shooting gear.
How do the gulls forage on discards?
All the gulls tend to pick off what they can off the surface. They're scavengers, that's what they do,
Is there a higher activity of fishing boat on weekends?
No, the fishing vessels here work Monday to Friday.
Okay.
They've been laid down by stipulations. They only really work Monday to Friday.
What do fishing boats do with their discards?
In the North Sea, wherever else, if they're limited to quotas and they're only out catching, say, haddock, the cod will be put back. They'll be dumped as quickly as they can.
A group of scientists conducted a series of experiments confirming the gulls' use of fish discards. Let's find out what they've discovered.
The first aim of the study was to examine if the population of lesser black-backed gulls foraged for discards in the Wadden Sea. What was the conclusion for this aim, and how were they able to collect the data needed?
They found out the lesser black-backed gulls do forage in this specific area. This was examined through the use of GPS logger attached to the back of the bird and GPS locations of boats. This way they could compare when and where the fishing boats were present in association with the gulls. As times and locations of vessels and gulls did correlate, they concluded that the gulls are relying on the discards from the fishing vessels.
Did they find any specific pattern for foraging for discards in the lesser black-backed gulls studied?
Yes, there was a highly significant difference between feeding locations on weekdays in comparison to weekends. During the week, they would spend more hours on foraging, while the effort was considerably low on weekends. This was probably due to the absence of vessels from Friday to Sunday when they were docked at harbor. This is backed up by the following graph. Illustrated by the increasing coloration, graph A shows a lot more foraging behavior during weekdays compared to graph B on the weekends.
Does the foraging pattern and therefore the lack of vessels on the weekend have any effect on the gulls?
No, they were able to adapt to the lack of food sources. However, that may not be applicable for other populations or species. So discards on fishing vessels is still an issue for some species, as they may not be able to adapt and therefore struggle more.
Does the size of the gull determine the usage of discard?
There's no clear evidence that links their body size to their feeding strategies in this case. However, their body size can particularly impact how the genders interact with one another in terms of their dominance, in terms of competition and their flight efficiency. All of these could potentially change their feeding strategies in the long term.
Is there evidence of these differences?
Yes, there is observed difference in terms of their feeding strategies during the breeding season. Especially maternal gulls prefer to collect fish discards because it's actually preferable for improving the potential that their chicks are going to hatch and increases breeding efficiency during the breeding season.
How would the unnatural food resource be expected to impact the bird population in and around nests? How would you measure any changes?
The population of the gulls would be expected to increase due to a larger quantity of food available and less competition whilst they're foraging. But an increase in the population and a flexible location of food would not necessarily have much influence on the presence of gulls at the nest or around the colony. This can be measured by a combination of breeding data from tagged individuals and measuring the length of foraging trips. For this particular population, discard foraging had no effect on their nesting attendance or the health of the eggs and chicks, even with a change in the habitat.
Would this be true for different populations of birds? If not, would this put the idea of banning discard into question?
Discard specialists are capable for adapting to foraging behaviour in the temporal absence of their preferred food source. This specific population has the ability to adapt quite quickly to these changes. We call that dual specialisation. However, there are records of a prolonged absence or abrupt change of discard in other areas, having a negative impact on the egg size and breeding success of the gulls.
What makes this study different from similar studies on discard scavenging? How does this impact future policies?
Well, in this case, they tracked individuals through the whole breeding season, and they were collecting data over a very long period of time. They were able to prove individual specialisation on discard foraging. In future, they'd like the industry to reduce discard production in a more sustainable way to change fishing practices. This reduction should be brought in step by step so that it will enable the species to slowly adapt to a more natural foraging lifestyle.
Some experts believe that reducing discards will be ecologically beneficial as the gulls will be encouraged to regain natural foraging behaviour.
Not for abandoning discards because it's more or less impossible to fish without discard. The nets that we use are not selective enough. You know, they can't discriminate between a haddock, a cod, a whiting, or a saithe, say. So that's more or less impossible to have it without discard.
Although the negative impact a discard ban could have on fishing industries is unknown, the EU ban on fish discards is set to start in 2019 for all EU countries. However, this ban must be implemented properly, otherwise it could have the opposite of the intended effect on many species, including our lesser blackback gulls.